Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you very much. And I call our two panelists, Graham Ching'ambu and Kasonde Mulenga, to join me on the stage. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So it is my great pleasure to be here in beautiful Namibia today to discuss a subject which is so important for this country, this region, and for the planet and people, which is water. But please let me introduce our two panelists first. So Graham Ching'ambu, Regional Fund Manager at SADC Water Fund at Development Bank of Southern Africa. And Kasonde Mulenga, who is Program Manager at Stockholm International Water Institute, SIWI, in the Africa Regional Center.
Thank you.
A warm welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much, Peggy.
Thank you so much.
So water is essential to the planet, to human health and prosperity, and to our economy. It's a key element of the 2030 agenda. 2.3 billion people live in water-stressed countries, of which 733 million live in high and critically water-stressed countries. And by 2025, nearly 2/3 of the world's people are expected to live under water-stressed conditions. So water-related risks are impacting our planet and people, increased levels of disease, on food security. They also represent significant risks for financial institutions and for financial stability. This is what has been highlighted in a recent report on the materiality of nature to financial institutions by the Network for Greening the Financial System, the NGFS, which is a group of more than 100 central banks focused on climate and environmental risk management. And the NGFS also concluded that of all the services provided by nature, water is the most important across an index, the MSCI World Index, which is a proxy representation of the global economy. And so water is the most important across this index for companies in resource-intensive industries, such as agriculture, mining, energy. The global financing needs estimated for achieving SDG 6, the Sustainable Development Goal 6, to ensure access to water and sanitation for all, are $1 trillion, equivalent to 1.21% of global gross product. But financial flows directed towards solutions to improve water efficiency and security and prevent and reduce water pollution represent a minor part of sustainable finance, and they need to scale up. Maybe just to conclude these few words of introduction, I want to highlight the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which was adopted in December 2022, as you know, and which really provides a key milestone for water and on the path towards restoration and protection of water systems and water-related ecosystem services, and to support Sustainable Development Goal 6 on water and other related Sustainable Development Goals, because it sets targets explicitly related to water. So we are going to explore now with both of you water risk assessment and management and solutions to unlock financing of water solutions. So maybe we can start with you, Graham. We would like to see with you a practical example of how to assess water risk under the SADC Water and Sanitation Fund that you run. Environmental and social impact assessment of project is the core part of the financing and investment decision process. Can you explain us how you include water in your assessment, impact assessment and risk assessment? Does that include water efficiency, water pollution, and which challenges do you face in assessing and managing risks, and how can we overcome these kind of challenges?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think when we think about water risk assessment, the first thought you have is, what is the value of water actually? And if you think about an economy, let's just take Namibia, for example. What value would you place in terms of its GDP? But maybe let me ask the question, and just to provoke some thoughts here. Can you think of any economic activity that goes on without water? So I think for our perspective from the SADC Water Fund, we're a fund essentially aimed at supporting regional water infrastructure development in the Southern African region, because we believe that there's a significant portion of the economies within the region that are dependent on water as a resource to continue to drive this. But in terms of how this is viewed and how we think about water and our businesses, and how we then assess it in the decision-making processes of this, let me start to say that we generally find that there's a lot more thought, for example, about carbon footprint by many stakeholders than there is about water and its impact on their businesses. And some of you might know the famous Day Zero that Cape Town experienced. And I think that just highlighted what level of risk to every single aspect of business that water holds within our existence as a people. But let me speak specifically. What do we do and how do we look at the water risk assessment and thinking particularly from an environmental, social, and governance perspective, which is a core ethos on which we make our investment decision processes in terms of the projects that we finance for regional infrastructure development. We generally align to the IFC performance standards. So essentially that guides the processes that we go through in terms of looking at a particular intervention. We think through obviously the environmental aspects in terms of does this project provide an opportunity for us to contribute to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, for example. We think through in terms of what are the opportunities in terms of biodiversity, so that we can come back and say that we are a net contributor to the environment in terms of that intervention, and how does this project or intervention mainstream that. We obviously think through the human aspects in terms of human rights, in terms of labor conditions and the environment within which the project operates. And we also look at aspects related to gender. And I think recently in one of the projects, you are doing a project and then you visit a community and you look at the social dynamics, and we noted that, there was quite a significant amount of women in that particular community. It's a low-income community that were essentially sitting and doing nothing. They didn't really have the opportunities to contribute to the economic means. And one of the things that in then assessing that project was to then look at the way in which we can embed a mechanism that allows for skills development for the women within the local community, so that at the end of the project, even if it's an infrastructure project, we would at least be able to talk about, these are the number of women that we have enabled to have a certified skill, and they are a little bit more employable on the labor market.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Graham, for this sharing this experience and highlighting the importance of upskilling local communities and women in communities. I would like now to turn to you, Kasonde. So water is a cross-cutting topic, and despite that, it's largely overlooked in financial institutions' sustainability strategy. So now we would be interested to understand from you how developing the knowledge on the nexus between water and other impact areas can help to scale up financing of water solutions. And one of the priorities of SIWI is precisely to develop knowledge and research on the nexus and the interconnection between water, climate change, deforestation, and other impact areas. So can you share with us the main findings of this work and recommendations for financial institutions to develop holistic sustainability strategies incorporating water?
Thank you so much, Peggy. Yeah, so SIWI as a leading expert in water governance and water diplomacy for shared water courses, not just Africa, but across the world. We are working in developing knowledge products that would ensure the nexus approach, because there's a lot that's happening when you look at food as well as water. So we are working as an institute in order to change the viewpoint from a world perspective so that water resources are utilized in a more sustainable manner. At the ARC, where we sit in Pretoria, we have one of our flagship projects called the Tiara Project, the Transforming Investments in African Rainfed Agriculture, which is tailored at looking at the investment outlay that goes into rainfed agriculture. Because if you look at the statistics, you will find that 95% of the food production in Africa is from the rain-fed smallholder farmer. Only 5% goes to irrigated agriculture. That's from public finance. So as an institute, what we are doing is we are building business cases so that we look at the bankability of some of these farming enterprises, because we view the African rain-fed farmer as the frontline managers for water. So there's a lot that they are doing in harvesting of water, using methods that are climate smart, conservation agriculture, and so forth. So that's what we are doing. We are developing knowledge products as an institute that are looking at the importance of green water as an important part of the water cycle. Because as you know, the rain-fed farmer depends solely on rain-fed water, but they are able to sustain their livelihoods. So we developed a theory of change which looked at the high unemployment within the region, within the Zambezi water course. There's a lot of competition for water and so forth. And using some of our methods where we went in, did a lot of stakeholder management, stakeholder engagement, we are looking at impacting some of the SDG goals, number 6, for instance, number 1 and 15. So as an institute as well, when you look at some of the recommendations that I would put for financial institutions, I would recommend regional approaches towards management of shared water courses. Also, we would recommend the strengthening of integrated natural resources management through execution of enabling actions that support integrated landscape management. And this can be done so that there's a reduction or a reversal on environmental degradation, which currently is happening. We looked at some of the studies which have shown that up to 51% of the land within the Zambezi watercourse, for instance, is degraded. So we need to do a lot. Looking at the financing that has to be plowed in, it has to make sure that the degradation is reversed. And also, some of the interventions that financial institutions can get involved in is that of building community resilience on climate change. And the last point that I would like to give is that of climate adaptive capacity, which financial institutions can assist in building. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kasonde. And you mentioned as well in your recommendations to financial institutions to put into practice integrated water resources management. I would be interested to have also your view on that, Graham. And because in order to be eligible to your fund, the SADC Water and Sanitation Fund, projects need to align with this concept. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this concept, explain why it is so important and what that entails for financial institutions?
Yeah, so I think when you're talking about integrated water resource management, you're essentially talking about the whole ecosystem of the water sector. You are talking about the economic and social benefits consideration that need to be kept in mind as you are looking at the water sector, but you're also looking at the hydrological considerations. Now, in the economic and social considerations, one of the things that you experience is this whole challenge of competing needs. So if I can give an example, on one of the projects that we've been looking at, this is a community that is in a very arid, water stressed area, but they sit on a good natural water resource that is underground, right? And that water resource over time has been contaminated due to poor sanitation practices within the community, and some of those practices also largely exacerbated due to the fact that water actually is scarce. So even the type of sanitation choice you make has to keep in mind that for several periods in a year, you're not going to have water. Now, as we go into that and we're looking at that project and saying, okay, so here's a typical project where you can do an intervention and you can clean out this water. You discover in the process that the problem is nitrate, right? So nitrate is bad for humans, but nitrate is great for who? The farmer, isn't it? That's natural fertilizer, right? So if they have high concentration of nitrate in the water, it's good. They don't have to spend so much on agriculture. So when you're looking at interventions in the water sector, you have to keep in mind this whole holistic perspective that you will have these competing needs, and you have to make sure that your interventions look at these balancing aspects. I think one of the advantages we have in the Southern African region in particular is that while over 70% of the water resources are shared water resources, there's also quite some good, strong institutional architecture in terms of how those water resources are managed, how the mechanisms that allow for sufficient environmental water flows for downstream users to protect all of that. But also, and perhaps where we are seeing some of the gaps is really in terms of the catchment management aspects, with the varying land use changes that are happening, where you see catchments being compromised. And then you see that you can go and do an intervention that is built infrastructure. Here's a water intake. We're going to supply this city with so much water, but you can't ascertain that you will continue to have that source of water if there is no deliberate source protection interventions to protect the catchment. So I think that is why even in interventions that financial institutions finance for the water sector, there must be this deliberate thought of this ecosystem approach and what is happening actually in terms of the integrated use of the water.
Thank you very much, Graham. And the example that you gave of this underground water, which is contaminated, leads me to our next question, because when discussing with you a bit earlier, I understood that in this specific case, what is needed is to develop a technology to be able to treat the water on site, yeah, which is a new technology, innovative technology, which means riskier technology, which financial institutions are not so keen on, and so developing de-risking mechanisms, developing public-private partnerships is something which can make the difference to obtain financing these kind of solutions, of situations. So let's speak about that, about public-private partnerships and how that can help to scale up the financing of water solutions. Kasonde, would you like to share our views on that?
Thank you so much. I think I'd like to say, first of all, that public-private partnerships are quite key. They would really go a long way in, bridging the gap in finance. Because if you look at some of the statistics, like the Africa Development Bank has put out that, there's a funding gap of about 10 to 19 billion every year in order to meet the, sustainable development goals. Africa, the world over, has about 300 million people who do not have access to clean drinking water, and over 700 that do not have access to proper sanitation. So PPPs would go a long way in meeting that financial gap, so that provision of water and sanitation are provided to the African masses. But there are certain things that need to be taken care of. I'd just like to highlight some of them. The first one being that, there needs to be alignment between government objectives as well as that of planning policy and so forth, so that business and government are aligned. They are working together, they are singing from the same hymn book, so to say. And then, of course, there needs to be robust stakeholder engagement with the private sector, the NGOs, and the population at large. Because we've seen certain projects which have been implemented, for instance, in the past, and then when it comes to implementing the user-paid principle, the masses turn around and say, we are not going to meet that particular aspect. So it needs to be very robust engagement from the word go, so that, rules of engagement are established. We know what, is expected from the private sector, as well as from government, as well as from the beneficiaries of whatever infrastructure is being implemented. And then, of course, there needs to be sufficient regulatory oversight. It needs to be very robust so that it follows through. Even political stability needs to be in place, so that even after successive governments, the PPP would go on. There would be no effect, for instance, on their profit, on the money that they're supposed to accrue from the financing that they've done in the implementation of the project. I think that's what I would.
Thank you very much. And yeah, Graham.
Yes, if you'd let me to just also add a few perspectives on that, and maybe also just share in terms of some of the initiatives that we are looking at as well. I think, I very much agree with what Kasonde has said, that you do need a predictable and stable sort of regulatory environment in the water sector. And this is important for making it a lot more bankable and bringing in a lot of partners. And one of the things that we are doing together with several partners at a continental level is what is known as the Africa Water Investment Program. And under that program, we've been developing a water investment scorecard. And essentially, what the intention of this tool is to enable each of the countries in Africa to be able to assess themselves from a perspective of what is the structure of the regulatory environment for the water sector in our country. And we bring in factors also that affect ease of doing business and things like that. And then it also allows a way of tracking actually how much is going to the water sector in terms of ODA, in terms of philanthropic contributions, as well as in terms of private sector capital flows towards the sector. So this is, I think, an important tool that has a very high political ownership on the continent. It was adopted by the African heads of state as something that is to be reported on. But it's a tool. A tool is intended to be used, and the hope then is that it begins to paint a very specific picture in each country that then both private and commercial and even DFIs can then relook at the possibilities of financing within the water sector within the context of very specific country level data. And that too then must be complemented by other financing instruments. So we've been talking at a continental level on working again with partners like UNDP and things like that, of a sort of blended financing mechanism. And what that looks like and the shape that it takes to address the continental needs obviously is very different. But I think the thing to note is that there are opportunities. So if I can again use two examples. Within DBSA, and looking particularly at the South African water sector challenges, one of the tools that we have developed is to see how the bank can support municipalities by front-loading essentially the cost of rehabilitation of water infrastructure, because as you know, and I know is the case with most countries, at least in Southern Africa, the infrastructure is old, it hasn't been maintained, it's leaking, so much loss of water, I think 50%, and usually if you translate that into a value, you find that it's billions of rands or of dollars that are essentially being lost. And this is because that rehabilitation is not happening. So we are looking at an instrument that allows us to be able to finance that rehabilitation, but in conjunction with the government and the allocations that they give to the utilities. So essentially, if the government is going to allocate 500,000 for the next 5 years on an annual basis of 100,000 or 100 million, then we can front load the cost and get that rehabilitation done today, but ring fence that allocation that government makes over the next 5 years. And I think that's where these opportunities now begin to open up for private sector participation, because in that aspect, then we are saying that then we must work with private sector developers and expertise that can run and operate and ensure that at least at the very minimum for the tenure of that facility, this facility functions and supplies and generates the revenue. And obviously then those private sector developers can then, would have needs of working capital solutions and things like that. And that would open up opportunities for commercial banks and for institutional investors as well. Another instrument I can give an example of in terms of public-private partnership is an innovation called the climate adaptation nodes, that one of the instruments that was adopted by the Climate Innovation Hub. And essentially, it's about being able to raise basically bonds, asset-backed bonds on the market towards projects that are financed by DFIs and then refinanced once the asset is complete and is operational by institutional investors like pension funds and maybe insurance and things like that. So those are some of the innovations that I'm aware of. And if I can add one very last one that I think is very important, is a program that we are doing for the SADC region, again with the support of the Green Climate Fund, to look and try and address the issue of data, and particularly the hydrological data for the region where there is shared water resources. To illustrate this, let's say that you have a farmer here in Namibia who abstracts water from the Orange Sinku River Basin, right? Now, if a commercial bank wants to continue to finance that farmer, one of the things they will need to understand is, well, how much of his farming is dependent on the availability of water? So it's all of it. But what is the risk with respect to the fact that he will continue to be able to abstract enough water for his farming as climate change continues to impact the river flows, right? So with the hydrological observation system that we're looking to develop, this would provide data at a basin level. So you would be looking at what's happening upstream in South Africa, and that data becomes available, and the farmer is then better able to plan for each farming season based on actually how much water is coming into and what the projected inflows of the river, and therefore what will be his allowable abstraction over the period. And that obviously feeds into how risk is mitigated for the banks that are financing him, but also provides data for example, risk insurance related to water.
Thank you very much for all these very practical examples and very inspiring. You wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add maybe one more last thing about how we can unlock the potential for PPPs in the water sector. I worked a lot in the Eastern Cape of South Africa, where I saw firsthand how that operations and maintenance is one of the biggest challenges in the provision of water. So the rural municipalities are undercapacitated, number one. Number two, there's not enough money to go around. So you find that CapEx projects are, they are spent, they are developed over multiple years, because the government would, for instance, give a certain amount of money, which is not sufficient to finish the entirety of the project. So you find that that has a lag in the provision of water. So the private partnerships can come in when tariffs are set at cost reflective tariffs for the water that is being provided. But we found that there's a lot of resistance sometimes from the political bearers, the communities and so forth, because there's this perception that if the private sector is involved in the water business, it's going to be run at exorbitant prices, tariffs are going to go through the roof and so forth. So there's a lot of stakeholder engagement that needs to happen so that people's fears are allayed, because the private sector comes in with the necessary expertise. They have the knowledge, the know-how of how to run these complex water treatment works, water sanitation works and so forth. So there's a lot that can be done in unlocking some of the potential so that PPPs are involved in the water business at a municipal level, even in the rural municipalities.
Thank you very much for this additional comment from you. Maybe we are now going to wrap up with the very last question to both of you. Could you leave the audience with maybe one or two main recommendations on for the financial institutions in the audience to engage in financing water solutions, or to scale up financing of water solutions in their portfolio? One or two main recommendations. Maybe we can start. Yes.
Okay. Yes. So I think the first one I would say is one of the big challenges that most of our countries are facing is the challenge of rapid urbanization. And water supply is very much critical to the well-being and the health of society. Now, most financial institutions, particularly commercial banks, will shy away from the water sector because it's not bankable and things like that. Maybe the tariff is too low and things like that. But I think that, you know, commercial banks collaborating with DFIs creates a lot of opportunities in terms of what can be done. And the challenge of non-revenue water, as we call it in the water sector, is very real for most countries. There is a lot of money in most countries that is essentially being wasted because water is treated, but half of it is lost. And that's not efficient in terms of resource efficiency. And if we're looking at sustainable development, we need to address that issue and ensure that whatever is abstracted really ends up with the consumer, so that we're not just pumping more and losing more, and so wasting more resources. And I think there's a business case there that particularly commercial financial institutions can look at supporting in collaboration with DFIs. The other is just essentially an appeal I would make, and I spoke about this hydrological observation system for the SADC region, and I think to make that work and the way we see it, it's going to take a whole lot of collaboration also with private sector. And where really the intention is that it would be able to leverage even further private sector investments in areas where they ideally would not have looked into, just because they don't have the data. You know, but if we can plug that data, then hopefully it eases a whole lot of risks, but it also opens up avenues for thinking about what is the quantum of de-risking that is actually needed to be undertaken to make this more viable.
Thank you very much. Graham and Kasonde, what would be your final words and main recommendations?
Thank you so much. I think the first one, just to add on what Graham was saying, the need for financing in infrastructure, old infrastructure for particularly rural capacity, low capacity municipalities who are struggling, as Graham indicated, with high levels of non-revenue water. I've carried out studies, I've been involved in studies which have revealed that over 50%, as Graham indicated, is lost, you know, treated, pumped to the reservoirs, but in the reticulation networks, there's a lot of losses that are happening there. So if you know, DFIs, funding institutions can get involved at that level, in as far as operations and maintenance is concerned, I think it would go a long way in assisting the provision of water in Africa as well as the Middle East. And then the second recommendation that I would make goes back to the frontline managers of water, the smallholder farmers in the rural areas. I did indicate that 95% of the food production in Africa is from the smallholder farmer, but 95% of the public money goes towards irrigated agriculture. So there's a lopsided investment outlay over there. So DFIs and financial institutions can do a lot to ensure that the smallholder farmer is supported more, so that they begin to practice conservation agriculture, climate smart methods of agriculture in order to ensure food sustainability and food security within Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much to both of you for sharing your experience, your views on this important topic. I trust it has been inspiring to our audience. As Liesl van Haas was saying in the session, in the opening session for this roundtable this morning. Let's seize the opportunity to advance sustainable finance. So I hope that was inspiring, and you will go home with food for thoughts to seize the opportunity to advance water solutions financing. Thank you very much, and thank you again.
Thank you.